Secretary Generals, student officers, the Junior MUN Committee joining us from another room over the live stream, distinguished delegates, Dr. Busch-Jansa, Hatita, Dr. Fritzenschaft, directors, and guests watching over the live stream. On behalf of the BERMUN2 team, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 18th annual session of the BERMUN2 conference. My name is Ophelia Reuter, and I have the honor of serving as president of the General Assembly at this year's conference. Seated to my left is Friedrich Martens, this year's Secretary General, and to my right are Solomon Iro and Maya Hauf, who will be serving as this year's Deputy Secretary Generals.
On behalf of all participants, we would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the support of our conference for 17 years. Almost 3 years after Corona first closed schools, we are delighted to be again at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. For many years, we have been welcomed at the KAS by former head of educational institutions and the deputy department head, Herr Kleine-Kraneburg, who retired this year. Herr Kleine-Kraneburg, we are grateful for your extended support and wish you well for your next stage of life. Additionally, we have appreciated the support of Dr. Busch-Jansa and Herr Felix Bäumel. Finally, we would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Brüggemann for his collaboration in planning to make this a successful conference. Herr Bäumel, who has helped tremendously in preparation for this conference, is unfortunately not able to join us today due to illness. We hope that you feel better soon. We are very grateful to be joined by Dr. Busch-Jansa, the Deputy Head of Political Education and Manager of Political Education Forums at the KAS. She has recently assumed leadership of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in place of Herr Kleine-Kraneburg. Dr. Busch-Jansa, you now have the floor.
Dear participants, welcome to this year's Berlin Model United Nations Conference. I have to admit that I'm a little bit nervous because it's my first speech in English, and I hope you will apologize if there are some mistakes. And I will encourage you to try as I do this today. So it's a great pleasure to host this conference at the Academy of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung again. We found ways to get together during COVID-19, but of course it makes a huge difference if you're here in person and able to contact to others like we do the next 3 days. Your participation in the BERMUN conference is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that will give you the opportunity to meet and learn from so many peers who all share passion for the pressing questions of our time. At the same time, you have the unique chance to experience the dynamics of multilateral negotiations firsthand, and you'll explore the full range of complexity of international relations and the power of professional negotiations. Your willingness to participate in this great project outside of everyday school life shows your passion, and we want to assure you that you can make a difference. For us at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, this house, the academy you're in today, is a forum for dialogue between politics, business, science, and society. We are delighted to open our doors so you can enter the stage and get involved. Don't shy away from controversial debates, but always keep an open ear for other opinions and perspectives. Trying to reach consensus while representing countries so different in history, culture, and use is a difficult task. You have to weigh your own personal interests, the next days, and religious and political values against those espousing contrary beliefs. Your undertaking corresponds with the mission statement of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, shaping democracy together. We are committed to social cohesion in Germany, Europe, and throughout the world, to promote the assumption of responsibility for oneself, for others, and for the community as a whole. We motivate, provide qualification, and activate young generations to be engaged in democracy. Mindful of complex global change processes, we focus on ethical responsibility, sustainability, and the preservation of creation. We believe that sustainability requires international cooperation, And you are invited to stay in touch with us, not just in Germany, but in all your respective countries, as we work in 100 offices around the globe. From this international work, we learn every day that we are connected with each other worldwide. The global sustainable development goals reflect this interdependence. They are an urgent call for action by all countries worldwide. You have chosen to discuss responsible resource consumption, which directly corresponds to the global sustainable development goals. These goals, like the 16 others, show how profound the transformation of our society must be in order to achieve true sustainability. Responsible consumption of resources can make a significant contribution to reducing the environmental impact of millions or billions of people around the world, thereby contributing to improved standards of living and health. At this conference, you will get the impression how hard it can be to reach democratic consensus. It's not just about pushing through, but about values and resonance. Sometimes you will have to balance national interest against global public goods. By assuming the role of a foreign country's delegate, you learn to understand perspectives on topics and that there are challenges which cannot be solved nationally, but only through international cooperation. In acting upon a common understanding of human rights and political values, hopefully you all come to an agreement within the next days. I hope you have 3 days filled with interesting debates, new insights, and most of all, a lot of fun. I'm sure your participation will have an impact on the way you view the world now and what the world will look like in the future. I'm looking forward to a future shaped by engaged young people as you are, and thank you for being part of this conference.
Thank you, Dr. Bush-Janza, for your kind welcome and for highlighting the importance and challenges of multilateral political cooperation and dialogue. We appreciate your comments and extend our thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their continuous support.
We are also thankful for the support of the John F. Kennedy School and are pleased to have American High School Principal Dr. Mark Fritzenschaft joining us. Dr. Fritzenschaft was a former MUN director in the United States before coming to JFKS in August of 2022. Dr. Fritzenschaft, we are grateful that, despite your busy schedule and many obligations, you are able to speak to us today. You now have the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, delegates, directors, and all who have the privilege to be here today. I do consider it a privilege to be here today, and I'd first like to start off by thanking the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for the continued support and the long relationship that we've built with the John F. Kennedy School Berlin, and we look forward to continuing this relationship long into the future. As in my introduction, it was shared, I am a former MUN director as well, and I would be lying if I said that that was not one of the main reasons I accepted the principalship here at the John F. Kennedy School. In all my years, I've been involved in numerous student organizations as a teacher, as an educational leader, and I can honestly say that there has not been another program that I have been involved with that I see the same impact that Model UN has in terms of education, in terms of teaching you about the world, teaching you about the issues as a knowledge base, but then also the skills and competencies you develop in the classroom, when you attend conferences, when you engage with other students, when you engage in critical thinking, when you engage in negotiations, and thinking about these problems that will not be solved in my lifetime, maybe in yours. That is the hope. But that is why you are here today and continue to be involved in Model UN, is because the hope is that one day you will be the ones to solve these problems. Which brings us to our theme for the conference, responsible resource consumption. This is a theme, this is a problem that it will not be solved in the near future. Maybe it will be solved in your lifetime, maybe your children's lifetime. But if we are not approaching it today, if we're not thinking about the ways to solve and think about this, then we will never be solving it. So I encourage you today to think about that and how we move forward. Thank you to Dr. Vosjanza in saying she was very nervous in speaking in English. And I would like to say I would also be very nervous, and my speech would be far worse if I had to give it in German. So I encourage you, for those of you who are here, who are nervous about your English, there's a phrase in English development that says the day that you stop trying is the day that you stop learning. So I encourage you to try, I encourage you to speak up, make mistakes, it's okay. We're about communicating ideas. So know that no one here will be judging you and that we are all here to learn together. As well, if this is your first Model UN program or conference, first off, welcome. But also, don't be nervous. I understand there's a propensity for that. But again, we're all here, and I want you to engage in the process. I want you to raise your hand for a point of order or a point of information if you need some clarification. That is why we have these things and why you can engage in them that way. But that is all that I have. Again, welcome. Have a fantastic time, and I will see you next year.
Thank you, Dr. Fritzenschaft, for your kind introduction, your relation to the theme, and for motivating us for the start of this conference. At this time, we would also like to thank Milena Reed, who has worked hard to realize our conference theme in this year's artwork. Depicted in the art is a cake which represents different resources: oil, water, metals, soil, and energy. One slice of cake is cut out and measured on a scale. The scale reads equity. This artwork highlights the distribution of resources using the scale and the consumption of resources using the analogy of food. This artwork challenges the viewer to think of what a responsible and equitable consumption is. Let us give Milena a round of applause for her creative work.
For the next 2 days, you will be debating a number of issues related to our conference theme, Responsible Resource Consumption. Therefore, we would like to invite Maya Hauf, one of this year's Deputy Secretary Generals, to take the floor to elaborate on the committee topics and their link to our theme. Maya has been a dedicated member of the BERMUN team for years and has always been very helpful keeping us on task with her productivity during our late night meetings. Madam Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Think back to what you have done so far today. You probably have eaten breakfast, brushed your teeth, and maybe turned on your laptop to do some final pre-conference work. Now, consider what this day would have looked like if you were forced to significantly reduce the amount of water, food, and energy that was available to you. That day is probably very different, as well as difficult to imagine. This is because the lifestyle that many of us at this conference are accustomed to uses far more resources than can actually be sustained, having the unintended side effect that humanity's home, the Earth, is being destroyed. In 2016, the United Nations created the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, each centered around an aspect of sustainable living. The 12th focuses on sustainable consumption and production patterns, and is the basis of the BERMUN2 2023 conference theme. But what does it mean to be responsible in our resource use? There are many issues that must be taken into account when pursuing responsible resource consumption, and at this conference, we will be focusing on two: sustainability and distribution. Unsustainable consumption habits are one of the causes of multiple global crises, such as climate change, environmental degradation, and food insecurity. A key issue in this is that we use resources past the point where they can be replenished. In the SPC, delegates will find solutions to using energy more efficiently in order to prevent it from being wasted and furthering climate change. Unsustainable living also leads to health concerns, such as malnutrition due to lack of access to food or sufficient food resources, or the polluting of the air that we depend on to live. delegates in the WHO and junior MUN will be discussing these topics. In addition to environmental impacts, irresponsible resource use can lead to financial crises due to extreme dependency and the eventual depletion of resources, as considered in the Environment Committee. Secondly, resource consumption is greatly impacted by the distribution of resources. While some countries naturally have more access to more resources than others due to their geographic location, these inequalities are exacerbated by land disputes, as will be addressed in the ICJ, or by resources being exploited by countries or corporations, which is being debated in the ECOSOC. To combat naturally occurring inequalities, many nations have turned their interests to neutral areas, such as the Arctic, which is an issue being considered in the SC. These situations raise further questions that are related to equal distribution. Who should control resources, and who do these belong to in the first place? Is it ethically and legally justifiable to claim resources in land that is neutral, or even that of a sovereign country? What should regulations also apply to countries that consume far less resources than others? Or should there be some form of diversification in our measures? These legal and moral considerations have the potential to be the cause of future political conflict and will shape how we live on this planet into the future. At the beginning of this speech, I asked you to visualize your life using fewer resources, illustrating the unsustainable lifestyles that many of us follow. Despite the measures that countries have already implemented, we must continue to pursue responsibility in our resource use through both economic and environmental sustainability and equitable distribution. This is an incredibly complex issue, and it encompasses far more than what has been mentioned here. And while it feels difficult to tackle an issue as big as this one, any action we take to solve the issue is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, for highlighting the committee topic's connection to the overall theme and elaborating on the meaning and relevance of using resources responsibly.
Next, I am pleased to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Florian Tietze. Hatita works as the policy advisor for international biodiversity policy at the WWF. Thank you, Hatita, for taking time out of your schedule to address the forum today. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency. All protocols observed. Good afternoon to all of you, and first of all, a great thanks to allowing me to speak in front of you. This is a great pleasure, and it's very exciting for me to see so many young, sharp minds and students interested in the topic of international politics and willing to really spend their valuable time in doing this exercise and really learning about international negotiations and how important they are. And before continuing with my speech, I also must admit that I have a slight concern, because experiencing the first 10 minutes of this, I'm almost a bit concerned that whatever I'm going to say to you, you already know. But I'll start regardless. I've been introduced, maybe a few quick words on why it might be worth your time to listen to me before you go on your exercise. I've experienced in my still short career a lot of UN negotiations. I've worked in New York at the UN headquarters. I've learned a little about how the UN works, how UN negotiations work in practice behind closed doors. I now work for an NGO, so I also know how it works when you are trying to influence these negotiations from the other side, from the side of the civil society. So I hope I have a few thoughts to share. Hopefully I have also some motivating words to you, and maybe some pointers, and hopefully also I can respond to your questions afterwards. So I want to start a bit more general, and I want to talk a bit about why international negotiations, international institutions, and international politics is important, and why it's worth really engaging on this and learning about this, and maybe making a career out of this. So why is it important that all countries in the world are trying to find common understanding and agreement on topics like peace, trade, health, development, the environment, just to name a few. And again, you probably already know the answer, but I'll say it regardless. Many of these challenges, most of these challenges are global challenges, and they're increasingly global challenges that are getting more and more intense. And for these global challenges, we need to have global solutions. That means most of these cannot be solved by a single country or a small group of countries. They can only be solved if the world works together, if it wants to have a chance to succeed. And since we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and sustainable development, to sustain our life on this planet and live in prosperity and in peace and in harmony with our environment and our ecosystems, where our natural resources that we need, our life support systems that we depend upon, that we preserve them. I always go back when I talk about the United Nations to one of my favorite quotes from a former Secretary General of the United Nations from the early times, Dag Hammarskjöld, who after the foundation of the United Nations said something that I still think rings through today, and he said, "The UN was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell." And I think that's the reason why, to this day, all the nations of the world come together to discuss things at the UN, because they know they have to, otherwise they will not be able to solve some of these issues that affect them all. He, of course, said that mostly in relation to world peace, after 2 world wars had devastated the globe. But I repeat it because I think it still is very true to this day, because the most pressing, or some of the most pressing issues we face as a global community are the ones of sustainability, climate crisis, biological diversity, sustainable development. If we don't address them together, we are going to be in big trouble, and they affect every human being on this planet, and they're global challenges. If the rainforest and the Amazon basin collapses, it will affect us all. If the ocean ecosystem dies, it will affect us all. If the ice caps melt, it will affect us all. And of course, again, since we're talking about production and consumption here in SDG 12, that is inadvertently linked, because of course these problems have origins, and mainly it's our behavior, including the topic of production and consumption. And while saying that only global solutions can help us, all countries working together, it's of course true as well that only if we agree on how to work together and what the goals are and how we achieve them through international negotiations, we take the first step in actually acting. So that brings me to the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. Also understanding the focus of this exercise that you're doing here. They are so important and such a turning point in 2015 when we were able to agree them, because they in a way speak to solutions to all of these very interlinked and combined issues, and they do so in 2 levels. First, making the lives of billions of people around the world better in all their aspects. And second, to do so sustainably, without continuing to destroy our natural foundations of our home planet that we so much depend on. They also address a lot of the societal challenges that make our joint world, for many people around the globe, struggling to live in at the moment. So they address equitably an equitable world, a just world. Again, make our planet a better place to live. And that is critical, because as long as the majority of the world's population is still struggling with things like poverty, nutrition, equality, and justice, and of course peace and security, we will also not get around to address these fundamental existential sustainability issues, the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, pollution, to only name a few. And also, of course, since the focus of this conference, this meeting is about SDG 12, I also want to add why production and consumption is such a key part in addressing the climate crisis, nature loss, and pollution in a brief way. Because the reality is that, and it's been very neatly summarized with this artwork, I'm going to call it the ecological footprint that our production and our consumption has on the ecosphere, so the combined ecosystems of our planet. our footprint is multiple times larger than it can be, and it's been said already that our ecosphere can regenerate and sustain. So we're treating our natural environment, our natural resources, nature as an endless resource, which it isn't. And that only is can go for so long, and at some point then we'll not be able to do so anymore, but then it will be too late to turn this around for our global community. The way we, of course, extract resources, turn them into goods, not only exacerbates global warming, the destruction of the environment and pollution, but it also is at the core of global inequality, which in turn can lead to poverty, food insecurity, and many other issues that are widespread across the globe, all the way going to peace and security. To get to the SDGs in the first place, of course, was a long negotiation process, something that you're going to practice on, which was, of course, necessary. At the same time, the Paris Climate Accord was being negotiated. It was difficult, it was exhausting, but it was only possible because we, at the time, in 2015, and that few years before, we had quite a beneficial global environment with key governments in power that understood the value of multilateralism and of common understanding and of global cooperation. Unfortunately, we've seen in the last few years and maybe in the past decade that some of that got increasingly under threat. Multilateralism, we say, has been a bit under threat. And that's why I also am so excited that you all are also interested in this, because that needs to change again. We need to have the value of multilateralism and global cooperation understood if we are going to have a chance to not only agree on future agreement, but also implement them in practice. As many of you probably know, this has been the bigger challenge in the recent past. Now, also a few words on how do negotiations work in practice. How does it work behind closed doors in these big conferences, but most importantly, before great conferences at the UN, most of these negotiations happen behind closed doors, with fewer people, and I want to talk about that a little bit, because I can't really go into too much depth. It's a long process. If you think about all the phases, from first exchanges of views and expectations to technical and scientific advice of experts, development and preparation of political positions, coordination between different parts of the government and stakeholders, developing a first draft, then coming to text negotiations, and so on. It's a long process, and I can't address that all in my 15 minutes I have to speak, and I'm probably already over time. But I would like to emphasize one thing that I believe is critical to understand for everyone that's trying to understand and engage in international politics. Whatever it is, whether it's a sustainability issue, peace issue, and that is that these negotiations are always driven at the core by national interests. Again, as I said in the beginning, countries come to the UN because they know they need to work together on these things. But that does not mean all of those countries and governments do not come also trying to do their best to get the best piece of the pie, whatever the outcome will be. And that is precisely what makes these negotiations so difficult, but it needs to be understood. Because solving a global issue, such as sustainable development, requires a lot of effort. Costs that come with implementation, it's difficult to do. And our world is very unequal at the moment, both in terms of how affected countries are by global crises, such as the climate crisis, but also how much they've contributed to its emergence in the first place. So what is a fair agreement? What needs to be done? By whom? Who's getting support? Who needs to pay? How must countries report on progress? How quickly do they need to act? Understanding also that every government has to go home and sell these issues to their own population, especially when elections are coming up. All that, when you think about 200 countries who are doing this, have to agree on the same words, the same text, it makes it complicated. And I'm looking at time, so I quickly want to go on one example that I experienced the last 3 years. I've been very involved in the negotiations on a new treaty on biodiversity that we agreed at COP15 on the UN Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal last year. And just a few points on that. People call it now, or some people call it the Paris Agreement for Nature. It's debatable. But what the world saw was a big conference, 3 weeks in Montreal. but the entire negotiation process took 3 years, if you even exclude predecessing sort of preparation. And 196 countries negotiated, and we negotiated on all aspects of the environment, economic development, finance, gender issues, human rights, business, health. All of that needed to be part of that agreement. And while we were negotiating on how much land and sea area we need to protect, how much forest we need to restore, how governments need to deal with unsustainable agriculture, a lot of the time was actually also focused on how does all of this affect each country differently? How are we going to pay for this? Who is going to pay for it? How are trade issues involved? So basically all the global political topics always seem to emerge, and countries have that in their perspective, and I understand that some of this is what you're going to do and understand. And that is what brings me to my last point, which is my attempt to give some advice to you when you're in your negotiations. And that is, well, as I said, national interests are driving these negotiations. Don't act like you're not acting according to those interests that you represent. Every diplomat does that. It's their job, and everyone knows. And everyone else is doing the same. What is important is that you keep the joint interest for all for a successful and fair agreement in mind while you negotiate. And that you don't forget the initial purpose of the negotiation. We negotiated the SDGs because we all understood that we need to develop. Every country in the world, every population, every society needs to develop. But we also understood that we need to change the way we do that, otherwise we destroy this planet that we're living on. So when you negotiate, keep your interests in mind, but do so in good faith. Understand that you will need to make compromises for achieving consensus, also everyone has to, and negotiate as honest as you can be while negotiating as strategic as you need to be. Also, very importantly, be nice and friendly. I have no doubt that you all will do that, but it's actually very important and underestimated. You need to build trust. It's much easier to negotiate with someone who is friendly, that has an honest smile on their face, and that you can look in the eye. We've experienced during the pandemic, where we try to have virtual negotiations, that that's actually not working so well. Because it's much easier if you're looking at a screen, maybe you even turn off your video, you're not in the room with the same person, you don't have to look her in the eye. It's easier to say no, instead of debating a difficult problem. And diplomats learn this in their training. So trust is key, because if you cannot trust a person, if you don't believe what someone is saying, it's very difficult to negotiate and to come up with creative solutions to a problem that doesn't have the perfect solution. Some people say that the trick of finding agreement at the UN is making everyone equally unhappy. So you need to find ways of doing that. And the last point is, I also want to end with something that I'm often being asked, and that is it all worth it? Is the UN actually delivering anything, or is it just for show? Is it just words? And I know that it often has the appearance of the outside, because, to be honest, we lack the implementation of some of the things we agree on. We're not close to the 1.5 degrees target of the climate agreement from Paris. None of the SDGs are on track. But if you turn it around and ask yourself, where would we be if we wouldn't have these agreements? I would probably say we would be lots worse off. That doesn't mean we need to not do much better. But the point is that as a first step, without multilateralism, without talking about how we're going to jointly solve issues, how we understand each other and each other's interests and problems and issues, we won't go anywhere. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. It's at the end up to us and you in the future as the upcoming generation to actually do that. And if we achieve the SDGs, I think, going back to the words of Dag Hammarskjöld, the former Secretary General, we'd be a lot closer to heaven, I think, than just to avoiding hell. And I hope you also hold all of us accountable while we're still trying to work on that until you're hopefully yourself at that point and trying to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you for your interesting remarks on our topic of responsible resource consumption. Your experience in international relations and your remarks on how we can achieve a greener future and why it is so important is a great asset to our delegates. We are thankful that you made time for us today. Delegates and chairs, you now have 15 minutes to ask questions to Hatita. Once called on, please use the microphone in front of you. If you do not have a microphone at your seat, please wait for a member of the administrative staff to bring you one. The floor is now open. Any delegate or chair wishing to ask a question, please raise your placard or hand. The first question will be coming from the delegate of China.
With your experience in the field of NGOs, do you think countries nowadays are more inclined to support things that maybe don't necessarily directly affect their country compared to, say, the end of the Second World War?
I understand the question in a way that you're asking they're willing to engage in topics that are not a primary core, let's say, pressing threat to them, but they understand it's a global issue, so they're willing to cooperate in solving it. Is that the question? Yes, I think that is the case, and I think the United Nations have done a lot to do that because we've seen an emerging sort of soft power that the UN is. It's not only about hard politics where it's about power, it's also about prestige, it's about how you're being viewed by the global community. We're also living, and technology has aided us there as well, in a world where it's much more difficult to impose a view to your own population on how to see your government. So I think that is definitely the case. I also think we live in a world where these issues are becoming fewer and fewer. So when you look at these global issues that are the big topics that are being negotiated and discussed at the UN, very few countries can say they don't really are affected by them. So I also think that plays a role. The challenge remains that many governments in the world have sort of shorter outlooks into the way they're engaging as they should be, because we're having election cycles and we're having interests of national politics. We're having, politics is complicated, but also the UN has helped there to institutionalize processes where we come back together again and again to discuss the same things, and we may not solve them the first time, the second time, the third time, but it always comes back. So we remain in discussion and we never lose the chance of solving an issue.
Before we move on to the next question, I would like to clarify that you do not have to remain in country's policy when asking one of these questions. The floor is now again open for anyone who wants to ask a question. The delegate of Gabon, you have been recognized.
So, in your tenure as a person working in international relations, how often is it that you come across logically fallacious arguments, and how would you recommend we counteract them?
That happens actually not that much, depending on what perspective you have. At the moment, working, for example, for an environmental organization, and if I listen to and I participate in negotiations, and I have my viewpoints, where I think it's a certain level of ambition. We have positions, and we don't see any reason why any government wouldn't abide by them. But from that perspective, yes, a lot. But if you're actually trying to understand, and that's why I said to emphasize common understanding, many diplomats and trained negotiators, they have a habit of rationalizing whatever they say very well. So if you try to put yourself in their shoes, I don't think logic is usually the issue. It's just that we see the world very differently and the priorities are very different. I've just experienced it at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Some governments there weren't that interested in having an ambitious agreement, but not lacking for reason of explaining why they're against certain things. They just value other policies and other directions more.
Any other delegates wishing to ask a question? Could we get a microphone to the front to one of the chairs, please? Thank you very much. The microphone should be on.
Does it work? Yeah. Seeing as you have worked both within the UN and with an NGO, the WWF in this case, what do you think are the advantages of being able to work from a civil society or for a governmental organization, and what do you think is easier to achieve and what is harder to achieve?
Well, I'm not sure that I can answer the latter part, because I think that's very individual and just depends on sort of the course of your career. Well, I'll try to answer the first one, and there's a clear distinction between pros and cons, I would say. In a government, depending, of course, on the position that you have, there is strict guidelines, hierarchies, everything works through bureaucracy. But depending on where you are, you have a clear impact on your government's position and actions, and you could say that is in that way more impactful. Although, of course, you're restricted by the policies and by the positions of your government. Say you work in a ministry, right? Then it's not up to you to define the direction of the policy, it's how it's defined, maybe. If you work for a civil society organization, you have much more freedom. You can be much more idealistic. You can be much more, let's say, aggressive, ambitious in the way you are advocating for certain things. Shoot for the moon, knowing that governments will never probably fully agree with you. But depending how well you do your job, you could say you're very much less impactful, because you're not always listened to, and there's no strict rule, or even in many cases a habit of including you in consultations, right? So you need to be more creative.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If we could pass the mic back to the other chair. Thank you.
Work? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, if we were to find like an ideal solution to global issues in general, would this be possible without interfering with some states' sovereignty and legitimacy? Because, for example, some ideal solutions for certain states might be interfering with other states' legitimacy or sovereignty. Would this be possible for an ideal solution that would be good for every state?
I would and thank you for that question, that's a very good one. I would distinguish between ideal solutions from, let's say, a scientific perspective. We have the IPCC, we have the IPBES. These are the panels on, two of the Rio conventions that try to give us the perfect advice. They throw the evidence at us and they say what we need to do. The political reality is never that we can fully do what they advise us, because again, there is differences in national priorities and the matter of sovereignty. The UN can't impose on most issues what a certain state has to do, except for extreme cases of, war of aggression, something like these things. So the answer is no, but I want to specify it's no because a political solution always has to take the views of all the participating members into account. So the UN General Assembly, one vote per country, whatever that country is, and again, that is just the reality of politics, that we need to get the closest possible solution that is the closest to the ideal solution, but that everyone can agree on.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Delegate of Japan, you have been recognized.
Given your specific expertise in negotiating, would you have any tips or tactics for those of us who try to negotiate or bring together two parties who don't necessarily want to work with one another?
It happens that I've actually tried to do that multiple times in the past, not always succeeding. But yes, so one thing that is very important is ownership and respect, and an environment that is conducive to speaking openly and trusting each other. Often that is the case because there is a lack of trust, or there is an understanding that there's a fundamental opposition of positions. But I think a trusted environment, also maybe including a third party that is just a convener, then holding back, not imposing an agenda, is very important. And also maybe try to come up with creative bridging solutions. That's the best advice I have, I think.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions in the House? Delegate of Indonesia, you have been recognized.
I find the take of national interests being the core motivation of debate very interesting, especially because it reminds me of Thomas Hobbes' Homo homini lupus est. So do you believe that it is intertwined in diplomacy, that mankinds are wolves towards each other, and is it only possible to move beyond national interest if one is not being paid for debating?
That's a very almost philosophical question, thank you. I don't think it's, according sort of to Hobbes, in our nature that we only can do it this way. I think it happens that also through history we have come up with a certain system how we govern and organize our world, and that is really by chance almost. If you go back to the Westphalian peace where the nation states sort of came into place, and it happens that we're having a system of national states that govern the people inside their borders and through various means, and then it happens that while that being the case, the only way to bring them together is sort of an umbrella organization that allows them to talk to each other in a certain way that fosters cooperation. But still, we are organized by national governments, and these governments have often many democratic ones are elected by their populace, and their re-election depends on what their people think. So they will hesitate to negotiate against their own interests because it's the interest that's obviously not, that's an idealistic thing to say, but the interest of their people. And if that is not according to the interest of another state that sees their position as the interest of their people, that makes the situation difficult. I think that's not the only option that we have as a system, but that's the one we have, and that's what governs the way we negotiate and do international politics.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Could we get the mic over here?
You talked of fading multilateralism and especially fading willingness for cooperation. In the face of these drastic environmental tipping points that we're facing, do you see any realistic hope that countries that as of now, perhaps because of economic reasons, have been blocking this progress, do you see a trend towards waking up to these dangers, or do you believe that as of now the danger of countries still ignoring these issues remains great?
I think the danger, as you call it, still exists and is one of the key reasons why we're not making enough progress. I also think that we have been making progress and there is a trend towards improving that situation. The challenge that we're facing is that this trend hasn't gone quick enough, and we're still dealing with fundamental disagreements in core issues. Like, for example, in the Paris, in the climate negotiations, it's still in the debate whether coal is to be completely not only phased out but eliminated. So I understand the concern and I share it, but I also still think that it's inevitable that we come around on these issues. The question is when, because at some point all people will realize that this is, for all of us, a very threatening environment and we need to do something. The challenge is, can we do it quick enough so it actually is still early enough to, solve it, because we know, as you said, it's tipping points that we're very close to crossing, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. We will now be entertaining one last question. Anyone wishing to ask this question, please raise your hand or placard. Delegate of Portugal.
Do you think that we here at BERMUN can come up with a realistic resolution to realistic responsible resource consumption?
I'm not familiar enough with the way you're going to do your exercise, but why not? You have the great benefits of not having been in years of actually real-life politics. You have probably a lot of creativity. You have a fresh view of the matter. You maybe come up with creative solutions that others haven't thought of. I don't see a reason why not. Do your best.
Thank you very much, Hatita, for your time and effort in making this ceremony all the more interesting. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
Thank you so much.
The BERMUN Press video team has been preparing a short introductory video for the conference. Please direct your attention to the screen behind us.
Heartbreaking. And this man has just found out that everything he owns was made through shit. His phone, watch, and AirPods, that's all he owns by the way, were all made by heavily exploited workers on the other side of the planet. Even the tissue he is using to wipe his face clean of the shame running down his eyes came at the cost of a poor tree. As he sits there, he thinks, Jesus Christ, I'm a terrible person. But then, he remembered. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism, dear boy.
Really? Wait. Okay, that makes sense.
You shouldn't have to feel bad about your phone being made by starving children or rainforests being burned down for soybeans. You're just a consumer, man. Is there really anything wrong with that? Go ahead, why don't you buy 10 more iPhones actually? Go buy some more iPhones, dude!
But does this mean we get to consume recklessly? Welcome to BERMUN2.
The conference theme this year is responsible resource consumption, and to help us grasp the topic more, we went over to the Secretariat and asked some questions.
Hi, I'm Ophelia Reuter, and I'm the President of the General Assembly at this year's conference. As with many issues, our generation has found that it is now up to us to save the future. It is now our responsibility to not only be aware of, but to actively try to be responsible when it comes to consuming resources. Whether it is small changes in our everyday life, or the pursuit of creating a global change, we are now the forefront of the resource consumers of the future. As many problems and crises are worsening every day, there is little time left to procrastinate this topic even further. Whilst researching for this topic myself, as well as helping the student officers research their individual committee topics, I came across several attempts to solve this issue, as well as possibilities to solve it in the future. What surprised me the most were the reasons why these solutions were never implemented, mostly due to lack of cooperation between member states. This just highlights the importance of what we do here at this conference, and it makes me excited to watch you delegates try to overcome these boundaries and try to solve this issue through a joint effort. In response to current global resource crises, as well as taking previous BERMUN themes into account, we came to the conclusion that this would be the most relevant one. Despite many other issues and topics being just as important, we found that what lies at the root of these issues is the unequal distribution of resources.
So here we are with staff. I'd like to ask you all some questions. First off, why are you staff?
They met the qualifications. They needed
They met the
staff.
qualifications.
They know.
Do you consume resources
Yeah.
responsibly?
I try to. I do my best.
Yeah, because my mom's traumatized.
Same.
Sam, what's this conference about?
It's just a bunch of debating and having fun.
So you can't tell me the actual theme of this conference.
Well, the theme is, well, for junior MUN, it's about like pollution and stuff.
Do you pollute yourself or not?
Me personally, I guess everyone does, like just small stuff.
I don't pollute. Do you consume resources responsibly? Because that is the theme, actually.
Responsibly, most of the time, yes.
Can you whip out your phone? Can you show us your phone? You know that was made by slaves, right?
I did not know.
Is that a phone?
Are you not holding one?
No. You know that was made by children, right?
Yes.
What do you have to say about that?
It's horrible. Sorry.
Do you own a phone?
Yes.
How do you feel about this?
Not good.
Do you wish you could put the phone away?
Yes.
Responsible.
My mouth.
BERMUN has spoken. Next.
So, Ophelia, how do the delegates even know that we're consuming our resources responsibly?
Well, they can check out all our latest updates on the BERMUN Instagram page called 2023 BERMUN. Check it out! Thank you to Benedict Winkler, Telena Parsons, Zoe Lehmann, and of course, Tony Aldani, who has also supplied us with the music and beats for this ceremony, for giving us such a passionate start to the conference. Thank you for motivating and inspiring us to lead a discussion on responsible resource consumption. Please join us in giving them, once again, a much-deserved round of applause. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Secretary General Friedrich Martens. Friedi has been a part of the program for many years and is one of our most dedicated members, mainly focusing on the courts and organizing our very messy office. He has worked with us for the past months to help bring this conference to life. Mr. Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Test. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me here today. Every year, 78 million acres of rainforest are destroyed, an area roughly the size of Germany. Every year, 10 million hectares of farmable land are lost to desertification and erosion, which equivalates to an area the size of South Korea. And in 2022, 828 million people worldwide suffered from hunger. This number represents nearly 10% of the world's total population. The way in which our economy is structured to consume resources for maximum output affects both our planet and millions of people all across the globe. In the following, I will explore the possibility of developing completely sustainable economies in MEDCs as well as LEDCs, and answer the question of whether this is compatible with economic growth. Various models exist with the aim of creating a sustainable economy while preserving the high standard of living in Western economies. One of the most well-known of these models is the circular economies model. Oh. There we go. Circular economies, as defined by the Stockholm Environmental Institute, a circular economy using a circularity approach is an economic system aimed at drastically reducing waste through the continual repurposing of resources for sustainability. A circular economy aims to achieve total renewability of all resources and can theoretically transform Western economies into a green, no-growth system that preserves the current standard of living. It is important to note that circular economy models do not support further economic growth, but merely sustain the current economy. Additionally, circularity could reduce overall production costs, incentivize job creation in recycling and the repurposing of unsustainable processes. However, this model is not compatible with every type of economy. Circularity requires a surplus of resources that can circulate throughout the economy, and in many developing countries this surplus does not exist yet. While it is unrealistic to implement this model in developing countries for this reason, the implementation of circular economies in LEDCs is of high importance from an ecological standpoint. When evaluating per capita carbon emissions by country, the countries with the highest emissions on average are all developed countries. However, when shifting the focus to the change in carbon emissions by country over the past centuries, rapidly developing countries such as India or Turkey are increasing their carbon emissions as shown by the graph behind me. On the other hand, most developed countries are actually reducing their overall carbon emissions. Every year, millions of people in LEDCs are granted access to resources such as running water and electricity. Due to the way in which these resources are sourced, however, this crucial development comes at the cost of the environment and increased pollution. This trend is similar with factors like overall garbage output across countries and highlights the need for sustainable practices. However, from a social standpoint, the implementation of circular economies in LEDCs is highly problematic as it prevents an increase in living standards in these countries, which is direly needed. It becomes clear that circular economies do not present a holistic solution. Countries require growth to lift their population out of poverty. How can this problem be addressed? Well, sadly, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to this issue. However, as the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development reports, it is important that developed countries share resources and know-how with their developing allies to maximize sustainable development, even if this means growth at a slower pace. Initiatives like these already exist, such as the EU Global Gateway Initiative, which is valued at around $300 billion. Developing economies can be shaped and influenced towards sustainable practices right now, and is much simpler to introduce the widespread use of green energy and resources consumption now than renovating and refining the economy in 20 years when development has been finished. In addition to considering the economic situation in LEDCs, however, it is important to also understand the general purpose of economic growth in MEDCs. For the individual, economic growth means an increase in the quality of life. This makes it difficult to convince people to give up growth for economic prosperity, for environmental protection. With global tensions rising between NATO, Russia, and China, all parties strive for economic prosperity. According to economists like Professor John Whaley, alongside military strength, the economic prosperity and power of a country clearly defines its position among the world's leaders. If it is the goal of countries like the United States or Germany to stay competitive with states like China and other rapidly developing economies such as in the Middle East, it is imperative for these countries to achieve significant economic growth, making the implementation of economic models such as circular economy increasingly difficult. As becomes obvious, it is important to find a balance between maintaining economic growth and implementing sustainable practices. Only a finite number of resources exists on Earth, and constant economic growth requires an infinite number of resources and labor forces to sustain. In addition, this economic growth comes at a high cost. Now, one of the most prevalent crises that have resulted out of countries' irresponsible use is the climate crisis. The climate crisis, brought forth primarily due to economies' high emission of greenhouse gases. The graph behind me shows the specific sectors which are most responsible for these emissions. Almost 75% of these emissions come from some sort of energy generation. The graph demonstrates that in order to address the climate crisis, one of the main focuses of economic reform must be the reform of the energy sector in the next couple of years. Naturally, this course of action is disputed among politicians. One argument presented against accelerating the process is the price of the reforms. In the past, countries and companies have chosen to rely on cheap coal and gas power plants to save costs in the short term. However, modern alternatives to fossil fuels such as wind turbines and solar farms are estimated to be much cheaper in the long term, as they do not require an input of fossil fuels to keep running. Nonetheless, coal and gas energy are also often made more attractive through government subsidies. A reform in energy politics and the energy sector could greatly improve the sustainability of our economy without reducing growth. Finding a solution to the problem of preserving economic growth while consuming resources responsibly is not an easy task. Keep in mind the reasons that drive economic growth and consider the urgency of the problem at hand. It is important to become fully sustainable while achieving maximum economic growth. Nevertheless, it is possible to find a long-term balance between the two. In the next years, it will be up to policymakers and politicians to find solutions for these problems. However, over the next 2 days, it will be your responsibility to find these solutions. When you begin committee sessions tomorrow, consider the necessary balance between these goals when lobbying and when debating. Finally, I hope you all have a very fruitful and happy debate tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your educated remarks on the compatibility of responsible resource consumption and economic growth.
For the past few months, it has been our pleasure to work with this year's team of student officers. We firmly believe that their contribution to each committee in terms of insight, character, and leadership will enrich all of our experiences at BERMUN2. We will now introduce the student officers of BERMUN2 2023 by their respective committees.
The chairs of the Junior MUN are Zara Louise Danziger, Philip Harashta, and David Beller.
The presidents of the Security Council are Paul Kepler-Guras and Moana Kamara.
The chairs of the Environmental Committee are Mathilde Adelhofer and Samuel Beer.
Next, the presidents of the International Court of Justice are Isaiah Bispalka, Justin Böhn, and Benjamin von Schweinitz.
The chairs of the World Health Organization are Josie Reamer and Charles Yang.
The presidents of the Economic and Social Council are Tadea Zering, Maike Hardester, and Antonia Jana Minich.
The presidents of the Special Conference are Philipp Wagner, Greta Zoll, and Eralb Toka.
We would also like to acknowledge the heads of administrative staff, Stella Brass, Francine Jackson, and Julius Schmidt. Additionally, we would like to recognize our two press editors-in-chief, Mia Robertson and Robert Fabik. These student officers have proven to be an enthusiastic and resourceful team. Their hard work and commitment will make this year's conference an especially unforgettable event.
At this time, it is my distinct honor to declare the 18th Annual BERMUN2 Conference as officially open. Distinguished delegates, some of you have the opportunity to address the forum and weigh in on the topic at hand. We will be calling on 5 speakers at a time. Please hold your applause until all 5 speeches are finished. After these speeches, we will be accepting rights to reply. A right to reply is a rhetorical question to one of the speakers which will not be answered. We ask that you keep your rights to reply clear and concise. If you are called on for a right to reply, please use the microphone in front of you by pressing the button. If you do not have a microphone in front of you, please wait until a member of the admin staff gives you one. The first speaker will be randomly selected by Hatita. After that, we will be calling on speakers alphabetically. Ambassadors, if your name is called, please approach the podium in the order you have been called on. Once again, please hold your applause until all 5 speeches are finished. This year, the first opening speech will be held by the Ambassador of Japan. Ambassador of Japan, please approach the podium.
Following alphabetically, we will hear from the ambassadors of Libya, Nigeria, the Russian Federation, and Saudi Arabia. After you have held your opening speech, please wait until all other speakers have finished their speeches before returning to your seat. Please also be reminded that speeches should not be longer than 1 minute. After 1 minute has passed, we hit the gavel to remind you to come to your closing remarks. Please give every ambassador the respect that they deserve and listen attentively.
Okay.
Could we ask the previously mentioned delegates to also line up at the podium, please? Ambassador of Japan, you now have the floor.
Will you be remembered as a monster? At a time when many of us are reconsidering who in our history we honor, be it in the context of slavery or atrocities committed during the war, we need to be aware that we too someday will be judged. And this is what we will be judged for. Our duty to future generations to manage the Earth's resources to allow us to have a future. This conference is our chance, some would say our last chance to do that duty. So let's not waste it to air our dirty laundry. This is not the conference to criticize Russia for Ukraine or the United States for Iraq. These digs help no one, create no solutions. Instead, we must compromise and pragmatize, act not as Eastern nations and Western nations, but as united nations. With this in mind, I ask you, fellow delegates, which will you do? Will you be remembered for the minutes, hours, and days you waste, or the solutions you create? The choice is yours.
Delegates, please hold your applause until all 5 speeches have been finished. Please hold your applause.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, the state of Libya is deeply concerned. Resources are being consumed irresponsibly and especially in richer countries, taken for granted. But what is happening to the countries carrying those resources? We are denied the chances of development because of the influence multinational corporations and larger countries have in our countries, and because the consequences of resource overconsumptions occur at our doorstep. More developed countries are dependent on our resources and are not afraid of exploiting. Fair distribution of resources as well as money is not ensured, thus leaving behind many parties involved. This cannot go on for much longer, so we need to come up with sustainable ways of extracting and using resources, while not leaving behind the countries that have been weakened. Having said that, Libya hopes for a successful debate in order to allow more countries to develop without being exploited and controlled. Thank you.
Please hold your applause.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, distinguished guests. We, the Nigerian delegation, are honored to be part of this year's conference on this substantial topic. As our country is blessed with a highly diverse range of natural resources, such as flora and fauna, vast mineral resources, and a huge agricultural sector, these resources form the foundation for our social and economic development. Therefore, it is of utter importance to protect those. We, the Federal Republic of Nigeria, have implemented a range of measures on this regard, such as introducing a ban on single-use plastic, practicing sustainable agriculture, and incentivizing the use of renewable energy resources in order to fulfill our duties as members of the Paris Climate Agreement. We urge all nations, especially the MEDCs, to do so as well, to actually commit to the agreement they've signed, and to take more steps towards a sustainable future for everyone. Thank you.
Honourable Secretariat, fellow delegates, and esteemed guests, with our rapid population increase and urban growth, our country, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has experienced a boom in the industrial and agricultural sectors, forcing us to pay close attention to the crucial 12th Sustainable Development Goal, responsible resource consumption and production. We, as a global energy producer, consumer, and leading member of the OPEC, we understand the responsibility that we hold to create responsible and sustainable solutions for our resource consumption and energy production. Our country has formed many different visions and plans, such as a Saudi Vision 2030, created by our Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and which aims to improve quality of life and protect our future generations through sustainability. We build these on the ideals of a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. Sustainable and responsible resource consumption lays at the forefront of a determined plan. We believe more goals, aims, and plans are required than just the SDGs in order to fulfill the responsibilities that we hold. Therefore, we hope that in this conference, efficient and mutually beneficial solutions are created in order to lay the foundation for our future generations to build upon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear delegates. This year's conference is particularly significant as we gathered together to discuss and address some of the most pressing issues of our time and of our future. The right and careful use of our resources is now more important than ever before. We need to work together to change lifestyle. Each year we meet the Earth Overshoot Day already in June, which means that we already in June use all of our sources. We are living in an increasingly interconnected world, where events and decisions taken in one corner of the globe can have far-reaching consequences for our entire planet. This is why it's important that we work together and engage in meaningful dialogue and find common ground and collaborate towards a shared vision.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, please raise your placards now. Seeing as there are none, we will move on to the next 5 ambassador speeches. At this time, we would like to wish the junior MUN a good start to their committee, who will now start their own opening speeches in the room next door.
The next opening speeches will be coming from the delegates of Sweden, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Bangladesh. Ambassadors, please approach the podium and line up in the order that you were called.
Honorable speakers and delegates, I am here as part of the delegation of the democratic country of Sweden. Our country was a pioneer in the use of renewable energy sources, more generally in implementing effective policies to protect our beautiful environment, one of Sweden's greatest assets. And yet, we are aware that even in Sweden, a forerunner in sustainability, a lot remains to be changed. We look forward to share our experience and knowledge with delegates from other nations, learning from those delegates and working together with like-minded nations towards a sustainable and peaceful future. Thanks.
Distinguished delegates, I stand before you today on behalf of the people of Ukraine to emphasize the importance of responsible resource consumption and its relationship to global peace and security. As we discuss this critical issue, we cannot ignore the devastating impact of the ongoing Russian-led invasion of Ukraine, which has been fueled by irresponsible resource consumption and has led to inconceivable amounts of human suffering and unnecessary loss of life. As we reflect on the consequences of this conflict, it is clear that irresponsible resource consumption can lead to instability, conflict, and human suffering. This is why Ukraine is committed to promoting responsible resource consumption and sustainable development, not only for the well-being of our own people, but for the sake of global peace and security. We believe that the sustainable management of natural resources, including land, water, and energy, can contribute to the promotion of peace and cooperation. It can also help address some of the root causes of conflict, including poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. In conclusion, let us remember that responsible resource consumption is not just an environmental issue. It is also a matter of human security and global peace. We call on all countries to join us in this effort and to work towards a more sustainable and peaceful future for all. We also urge Russia to end its aggression against Ukraine, respect our sovereignty and territorial integrity, and join us in promoting responsible resource consumption. Thank you.
Honorable Speaker and delegates, before I start, I want to speak out our gratitude to be here in person after the coronavirus pandemic. Speaking for the Environment Committee of Australia, we want the world to be a better one, so that our children, as well as their children, are able to live a good life. To achieve this goal, we want all UN member states to participate and take part in this time change. Mainly, we want to stop dependencies of crude oil importing countries. This is important in case not to give countries too much power. A personal intention of Australia's Environment Committee is to stop crude oil exports with tanker ships, because in case the oil spoils out the ship, or if a pipeline breaks, the oil occurs and harms the sea creatures, and the seafood is not be able to be eaten later. Especially our barrier reefs are in danger. Thanks, honorable delegates.
Honorable delegates, the change to an economy with responsible resource consumption for the People's Republic of Bangladesh might seem to be a story of a new beginning, but rather we would simply return to our previously functional system. In 1980, our economy shifted from a circulatory to a more consumeristic one. We would like to revert back to these sustainable consumption patterns. To attain this goal, we are currently working on implementing the UN's 12th Sustainable Development Goal. As of now, we have already implemented a system of disposing hazardous chemicals, plastic, and biomedical wastes in an environmentally friendly manner. And we have also implemented a national program to recycle and to reuse plastics and textiles also in an environmentally sound manner, both in the beginning of the last year. Especially because we are on the verge to becoming a developed country, we want to show the world that a developed country doesn't mean a consumeristic one, but can also stay economically friendly. With this in mind, we look forward to working with all member states to reach our goal of responsible resource consumption. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, this can be a question to any of the speakers. Please raise your placards now. We have one right of reply from a judge in the ICJ, yes?
Now it's working. We would like to ask the ambassador.
Please rise to state your question. Thank you.
We would like to ask the ambassador of Ukraine if they are aware that their country has been one of the most energy consuming in the world and on a rather rocky path towards new and renewable energy sources, funding only about 20 projects from 2013 till, until the start of the war or specialized military operation, as you might want to call it. Yeah.
Are there any further rights of reply in the House? Seeing as there are none, clapping is now in order. Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please take your seats.
The next opening speeches will be coming from Chile, followed by China, followed by Croatia, followed by Denmark, followed by France. In that order, please. Ambassadors, please approach the podium. Would the House please refrain from having any side conversations and give the ambassadors our full attention?
Mahatma Gandhi famously said, "There is enough on earth for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed." Madam President, distinguished members of the Secretariat, esteemed chairs, honorable delegates, fellow guests. The consumption of resources is one of the biggest factors in human well-being. And more importantly, in demanding times like these, we should ensure that they are accessible for all. But we need to be aware of all consequences. Therefore, it is in the delegation of Chile's great interest to satisfy the needs indifferently. To achieve our goals for a more sustainable resource consumption, we need to regard human rights, in particular the interest of the indigenous population. The delegation of Chile calls for actions to captivate all interests of all countries and ensure fair treatment. In consequence, it is our duty and honor as the UN to not forget these people when it comes to achieving responsible resource consumption. Thank you.
There you go. Honourable delegates, esteemed chairs. Since the days of Chairman Mao, the People's Republic has remained firmly and stalwartly committed to the responsible consumption of resources. The responsible consumption of resources is key to preventing the looming inevitable, that is, the climate catastrophe. As such, China is committed to limiting the extent of climate change as seen in China's mid-century long-term low greenhouse gas emission strategy, in which China has pledged net carbon neutrality by 2060 and invites other nations to do the same. While China is and will remain committed to this promise, other nations must understand China's importance in global manufacturing and the size of its population, resulting in higher carbon dioxide production than many other countries. Others may see this as a cause for concern and will seek to limit China's ability to use resources in order to benefit the global economy. However, there must, as always, be compromise. China's resource consumption will always be beneficial to humanity, and echoing the words of the great President Xi, we must protect the common home we live in. With this in mind, China looks forward to working with the rest of the United Nations in its goal of achieving net carbon neutrality through the responsible consumption of resources.
Honourable chairs, distinguished delegates, and esteemed staff. Protect your resources, share them consciously, and use them to your country's and the world's advantage. This is the dream. Is it a dream? We have the dream. We have set the goals and made the plans. Now to make this dream a reality, we are only lacking teamwork. Numerous countries are affected by unjust resource exploitation. This can only be resolved through global investment, effort, and regulations of certain multinational corporation systems. Affected member states, primarily less underdeveloped, should receive help and immense support. Croatia is a prosperous member state with diverse and rich resources, while also triumphantly preventing the international exploitation of the wealth we are blessed with, ensuring a flourishing economy. We pride ourselves in being an outstanding result. We therefore call upon all affected member states to take an example of us, Croatia, whose success only happened due to immense determination, teamwork, and pure efficiency. Thank you.
Albert Einstein once said, "You can never solve problems with the same way of thinking that created them." Madam President, esteemed members of the Secretariat, honorable chairs, fellow delegates, distinguished guests. Our planet has provided us with an abundance of natural resources, but we have not utilized them responsibly and presently consume far beyond what our planet can provide. We must learn how to use and produce sustainably that will reverse the harm that we have inflicted on the planet. As it's well known across the globe, clean energy is a Danish power. Today, 50% of electricity in Denmark is supplied by wind and solar power. The struggle for resources is now the second most common cause of conflict. The causes are usually complex and often lie primarily in political problems and disputes. In a world where we've got so many conflicts going at once, we cannot allow such a thing and must do everything in our power to change it. We must work together and create an innovation culture for resource efficiency. And we, the delegation of Denmark, won't give up until we reach a resolution. Thank you.
Honorable Secretariat, fellow delegates, and esteemed guests. On the 25th of September 2015, the General Assembly committed itself to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Throughout the ensuing years, we've seen development and sustainable policies, but environmental well-being has still suffered as an afterthought to economic growth. As we're only inching closer to the critical climate threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are eager to join you in this conference on responsible resource consumption. Our interminable struggle with this issue will bring to light facets of it that have been undermining the stability of our global community, such as the weaponization of resource exports or the militarization of profitable territory. France firmly hopes all member nations will be compliant and constructive in the effort of not only thwarting the exploitation of resources, but also alleviating the effects of climate change through responsible resource consumption. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, please raise your placards now. Is that a raised hand in the front row? Or then what is your delegation? Okay, then you can. These rights of reply will be coming from the ICJ judge and
How does China mean to justify its goal of carbon neutrality by 2060 if it's been clearly stated that that is not enough to uphold the Paris Agreement, especially as they're one of the biggest polluters in the world?
Are there any further rights of reply in the House? All right, seeing as there are none, ambassadors, you may take your seats.
The final opening speeches will be coming from Gabon, Guatemala, India, Indonesia, and Israel. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
Honorable Secretary Generals and esteemed delegates, it is no secret that the world is facing an unprecedented environmental crisis. Climate change, pollution, and deforestation threaten the very foundations of our existence. Gabon is home to some of the world's most biodiverse rainforests, which serve as a big carbon sink, home to endangered species, and a source of livelihood for local communities. Our government has taken bold steps to preserve the world's most biodiverse forests and by establishing protected areas, implementing sustainable forestry practices, and founding organizations to perpetuate this action. However, Gabon cannot do this alone. The international community must come together to tackle this global problem. We call on all nations to commit to reducing their carbon emissions and to invest in renewable energy resources. We urge countries to support conservation efforts and recognize the value of natural resources to local communities. We must act now before it's too late. Climate change is not a theoretical future threat. It is a reality that we are all facing. We must act with urgency. We must act boldly. Failure to do so will be catastrophic and will leave unprecedented consequences for future generations. The delegation of Gabon urges all member states to act in accordance with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and to work together to find an actionable and realistic solution to this problem. Thank you.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, the facts are clear. Overextended natural resource consumption results in soil degradation, water shortages, biodiversity losses, and global warming exacerbation. And that are by far not the only consequences which humanity will have to face in the next decades. But who is to blame? Mainly multinational corporations, which engage in resource exploitation, benefiting especially the mother and not the host countries. We have the duty to solve this dilemma, considering the continuing existence of the companies, but as well preserving our valuable resources. We would like to underline that banning these establishments out of states will not be a clarification. It will much more cause even more problems. The nation of Guatemala strongly urges the United Nations to create a transboundary policy for member states and ensuring that community participation in natural resource management takes a more meaningful role beyond provision of employment by the corporations. Thank you.
Madam President, honored chairs, fellow delegates, namaste and good day. India recognized the need for sustainable management of natural resources to promote economic growth and development. We have taken steps towards promoting renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, conservation of forests and water management. And we believe that every country can do that too, even as a developing country. However, we must do more to address the issue of resource depletion and climate change. Responsible resource consumption requires an international approach, including ensuring equitable access to resources for all. More developed countries, therefore, have the responsibility to aid developing countries through financial and technological support. Let us all engage in constructive dialogue to find solutions and create a more sustainable future for us. Thank you.
I have a dream, as Martin Luther King once said. This quote has nothing to do with our speech, but now the delegation of Indonesia has your attention. Multinational corporations have often disregarded our sovereignty and the rights of all people while exploiting our natural resources for their benefit without giving adequate compensation or contributing to our development. It is the international community's responsibility to ensure that states can manage their resources sustainably and equitably. Indonesia therefore urges all member states to support our efforts to establish international laws and regulations to hold multinational corporations accountable for their actions and to support the attempts of states to develop their natural resources in a manner that benefits their people, protects the environment, and contributes to sustainable development. Thank you.
Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, the state of Israel and the Middle East have a long history of hostility. Therefore, territorial disputes have escalated to resource conflicts, especially regarding water. But not only in Israel, in many other parts of the world, an unequal distribution of resources and exploitation have tremendous effects for the population. We, the United Nations, must stand as one and strengthen our bonds once more to prevent other upcoming conflicts. We are hoping to work towards a peaceful, democratic, tolerant, and most importantly, united world. Let us go back to the roots of the UN and strive for the most important values. Let us cooperate, revive, maintain friendly relations, and thus ensure a global, responsible resource consumption for all. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, please raise your placards now. This right of reply will be coming from the delegate of Mexico. You now have the floor.
Thank you. So, how does the delegation of India think that everyone is going to find a solution when we can clearly see that not every delegation is willing to cooperate?
Thank you, delegate. Are there any other delegates in the House wishing to ask for a right of reply? Seeing as there are none, thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please take your seats.
At this time, we would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to Alexander Gintar, who has worked on perfecting the platform throughout the last years. Alexander, your contributions have been crucial in our digital and in-person conferences. Given that you were a former head of our tech team, it is all the more special that we have been able to work with you once again. Thank you for your fantastic work and efforts to make this conference all the more exciting. Please join us in a round of applause.
Before we adjourn, we have a few brief but very important announcements. If you would like to keep updated with what is happening during the BERMUN conference, the BERMUN press team will report its work on the BERMUN website, bermun.de. You can also access this page by clicking on the news section of the BERMUN platform. If the press video hasn't already reminded you, the press team also has an Instagram account called 2023 BERMUN. Be sure to stay updated with the reports about the entire conference by reading the press page.
In the spirit of staying responsible, please bring a reusable water bottle to the conference. We will have large containers of water with which you can fill them up. Additionally, only take as much coffee or food as you will actually eat in order to minimize food waste. We would also like to remind you to make sure that we leave this building even nicer than we found it. Please do not leave any trash lying around and do not eat or drink in the rooms unless it is a closable water bottle. We're incredibly happy to be here at the CAS and we want to make sure that we reciprocate that hospitality. We also want to tell you about the special guest event tomorrow at 14:30 here in the plenary. It will be with Herr Matthias Lichatz from the Federal Foreign Office or Auswärtiges Amt. Herr Lichatz currently works as the head of the Division for International Sanctions and Investment Screening. He will be talking about his experience while working with the Security Council for the German delegation. He will also be expanding on his experiences as a German diplomat at the UN in New York and some of the German initiatives to be a non-permanent member of the Security Council. All participants of BERMUN2. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., you will be joining your first committee session in your respective committee rooms. Please arrive by 8:30 and be seated in your committee by 9. I will now read out the room assignments. You can also see these in the BERMUN program on page 5. If you have any confusion about directions, the admin team will be there to help. The ECOSOC will be in room 6. The ICJ will be in room 7. The SPC will be in House 2 in rooms 0.39 through 0.41. Joining them in House 2 will be the Junior MUN in room 0.40. The SC will be in room 226. The WHO will remain here in the forum, and the EC will be in the Jakob Kaiser Saal. As a final announcement, please do not take your country placards after the ceremony as they will be moved into your individual committee rooms. Again, please leave your country placards on the counter in front of you. As you leave the forum, please enjoy some more music and beats from press teams Tony Aldani. We look forward to seeing all of you soon.